Good evening, my friends. How are you today? Well, I have to say, around here in this part of the country, it's been a cold, dreary, rainy part of the day, and you can tell fall has set in. It is time to get out those warm clothes and start to think about how warm our homes are and be thankful for that. Today is also All Saints' Day. This is one of those church years that Reformation and All Saints drop right on top of each other, and we really have to make some choices about how do we worship. What do we do when? In fact, we will be celebrating All Saints this next Sunday at church. But it is a day we remember. We remember those who have gone before us, those who are the saints of the church. And I saw an image today that I thought was so perfect, that we often look in our churches and we see maybe the pastor up in front with a few people in the congregation. I want us to make that picture bigger. I want it to be not just the pastor and the few that are in church, and I don't care whether it's 10 or 3,000. I want us to see the front of the church that is filled with those saints that have gone before us, for those who have already become church triumphant. You know, and I was being reminded about this, and I had forgot that in many of our churches, or at least in the Swedish traditions, the half-round rail was put that way. And if we think about it, at least in the church I'm serving now, behind where that is, behind where my altar is our cemetery. The cemetery being and holding and encapsulating the saints that have gone before us. So the front half that is viewed is for those of us that are still relevant or still present. But the back is open to contain all the saints of the past that are in that cemetery and those who have gone well before us in time and history. I had forgot that tradition, and I started thinking back to a couple of the other churches that I served, the Scandinavian-based churches, and it is true, most of them do have the U-shaped altar. Most of the churches I served did not have a cemetery. In fact, this is the first. So that tradition is interesting, that behind that altar space would be the cemetery holding the saints of old. I found that quite interesting. And so today, as it is All Saints' Day, I want to say thank you to all those saints who've gone before us, and for the saints that are to come as well. For you and I each are saints. You and I have each been called to serve in a way, well, we may say, but I can't do anything. Yeah, but we do. Each of us have our role. For some, it's a praying. Sometimes it's just listening. Sometimes it's just being that steadfast arm that we can lean on when times feel tough, the confidant. Some of us are church workers and involved actively, but our roles are no greater than those who sit and have to be in those positions. But I have to tell you, those of you who pray and pray diligently are the true saints for the day. Don't ever dismiss how important that role is to holding the church and all its people. Okay, there's your Sunday sermon in a nutshell. Anyway, we are in Genesis chapter 47. And so I want us to, I got kind of excited when I started working through this today, well, the other day and then today, looking at it again, because I really feel like we are getting to the crux of what Genesis, and again, reminder about who all these characters are and how this is our story as well as their story. So, chapter 47, can you believe it? We're finally on chapter 47. We only started on July 1st of last year. That's okay. We're going to be done before July 1st of 22. That's the important thing, I think. And even if we weren't, hey, it's okay. I'm having a great time. Okay, so 47:1. So Joseph came and told Pharaoh, he said, now you have to remember, Joseph had gone to be with his family for a time. He had taken a short vacation. He had gone to be with his family. He had kind of coached them in what to say, which they actually kind of messed it up at one point, but that's okay. It actually turns out fine. But he comes back to Pharaoh now, and he's having a conversation with him. My father and my brothers, their sheep and their oxen and all that is theirs, have come from the land of Canaan, and here they are in the region of Goshen. Now, verses 1 to 6, we need to kind of keep this in mind a little bit, that Joseph is really informing Pharaoh about where the family is located. Now, Joseph has kind of picked this land. Maybe there was some conversation with Pharaoh before, but it almost sounds like that Joseph may have picked this land for him because it was the better of the lands, better of the region, better grazing land, maybe for all the animals. But so this is really going to be important, and there's going to be 5 representatives are going to request permission to reside there along with Joseph. So there, he will have brought back with him 5, and we'll get to that in a minute about how this may look of those 5, to have that conversation. See, Joseph really wants them to remain in Goshen, and there's some interesting things that happened with the name, with Goshen, and we'll get to that here in a little bit, I think. Actually, if you go over to verse 11, in verse 11, so Joseph settled his father and his brothers, giving them holdings in the land of Egypt. Okay, so we're kind of getting told this has already been done. In the goodliest, I like that word, the goodliest. So I'm going to start using that because it's a real word. It's in my Bible. So goodliest is a good word to use. Part of the land in the region of Ramesses, as Pharaoh had commanded. Okay, Ramesses is another name for Goshen. Ramesses is also the Exodus spelling of Goshen. And in the Psalms, this land is also Z-O-A-N, Zoan, is mentioned. So it's kind of got 3 names. It's all the same place, but 3 different titles for it. So we know that in verse 11, so from 1 to 11, we already know that's where they're going to be. See, it's already happened. The animals and everyone is there. And part of the reason I think that Joseph mentions that the sheep and the oxen and everything that they have is theirs is that he's trying to say that they are not freeloaders. They are not just going to be immigrants that are vagabonds that will give nothing to the economy. They are not just going to take from the land or from the person or from Pharaoh, but they will be willing supporters of. I want you to keep that image in mind. you might want to consider this in light of maybe some immigration issues we are having in our country today. So Joseph is saying they are bringing everything. They have wealth and they have ability to earn. They are not going to just take from. Now remember, this is time of famine too. And so there maybe needed to be a little bit more push in saying this is the story. This is how this should be. So keep that in mind. Okay? Verse 2. Now from the circle of his brothers, he had picked out 5 men and had set them in Pharaoh's presence. Now they were awaiting questioning a little bit. The 5 would be, or 6 would be there. Now there is a little bit of a dilemma, depending on which resource we look at, of which 5 were chosen. Some say it would have been Zebulun, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. Okay. Another source I looked at said it was Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Issachar, and Benjamin. I don't know. I'm not going to answer which one I think it is. I don't know. And I can't find anything that really documents, and we don't know who really was present besides Joseph in that conversation. What I do know is that the number 5 means grace. So what they were trying to, and I think that's interesting that Joseph is the one who picks and says there's going to be 5, because they were trying to find grace in Pharaoh's eyes. So that number 5, I think, becomes way more important, maybe, than who was there. The number. Again, you have to remember, numbers are significant. And we've already found that out. We knew that from Genesis 1. And we know that in Revelation as well, don't we? That the numbers are so important for us to keep in mind. So if they're looking for grace from Pharaoh to approve where they've already landed, I think it was already, I don't think there was any question in Pharaoh's mind. And I really think Joseph and Pharaoh had probably talked ahead of time, maybe. Okay, so they're awaiting some questions that are going to happen. And now Pharaoh has to talk, said to his brothers. Now, the boys already knew that there would be some questions. And they had been kind of primed by Joseph of what to say, maybe how to say it, how to approach Pharaoh at the moment, how to be, on the right side, the grace-filled side of Pharaoh. So Pharaoh asks, what is it that you do? He wanted them to say, we have trade, we are tradesmen, we are farmers, we are ranchers, we are not vagabonds, we work the land, we care for our animals, we are tent makers and whatever else that they could do, but that they would not be a drain on the economy. Remember, famine is going on here. That's why these boys are moving. Okay, so they said to Pharaoh, your servants are shepherds of flocks, so our fathers. Well, I don't think actually Joseph really wanted them to say that they were shepherds. You remember before? Shepherds were not, they were low class. They were not high paying, on the high end of the social scale. So they may have kind of, but again, there were 5. This is grace-filled. Maybe that's why. But I don't think that's exactly what probably Joseph had couched them or coached them in saying. They said it anyway. They were telling the truth. They were actually saying exactly what they did. And that's okay. That's how it should be. Okay. But did you notice your servants? They had already declared themselves as servants to Pharaoh. They would honor and do as he asked. He would do those things as needed. So they had already humbled themselves to that status. And I think that's interesting that status of servanthood has now been maintained. Okay? Verse 4. And they said to Pharaoh, it is to sojourn in the land that we have come. See, they weren't there to obtain possessions. Canaan was theirs. That was going to be inherited in the big story. But they were there, sojourning, traveling. I don't know, did they realize that did they realize they were going to be there for a very long time? I don't know. What we know is that they were clear. It is to sojourn in the land that we have come. We are not obtaining possessions. We do not want to take. For there is no grazing for the flocks that are your servants. They needed pasture land. And they weren't even asking for food. Joseph, of course, had provided the corn and the grains for their bread. They were just wanting grazing land is really what the question is here. And again, there's your servants again. Yes, I'm having to mark that because there's something for me that is significant about the fact that these servants are there. For the famine is heavy in the land of Canaan. So now pray let your servants settle in this region of Goshen. Okay, so now they have made a request. Servants are making a request of Pharaoh. They have humbled themselves to this status. They did not have to at that point, but they did. So they've made the request. Pharaoh said in verse 5. So Pharaoh said to Joseph. So all were present for all of this conversation, okay? The 5 plus Joseph plus Pharaoh. Okay, so your father and your brothers have come to you. It almost seems funny that we have a verse that says, well, yeah, like that's why they're here right now is because they have come to us. So verse 6, the land of Egypt is before you. So, yeah, let's come to you. The land of Egypt is before you. So basically, Pharaoh is saying, choose the best. What's best for them? Oh, he already did. And so that's why I'm wondering. Yeah, you have to wonder what's behind some of the conversations that already would have happened. In the goodliest, again, that goodliest part of the land, settle your father and your brothers. So the request is being granted. And really, Goshen would have been the most fertile and the most fruitful of the lands and the regions as you're choosing. The best is being offered to the brothers. There's nothing better at that point for them to go to. And if you know that there are able men among them, make them chiefs of livestock over what is mine. So now it's interesting. Think about this. See, Care now he's asking can some of the boys help with his livestock? He's willing. Pharaoh, this is Pharaoh, is willing to let them care for his livestock. So Joseph has a huge and immense amount of, what's the word? The word maybe is trust, ethic, that Pharaoh's trusting that his brothers have the same work ethic he does, that they will care for his as well as they care for their own. see what he's really saying. And if they're able-bodied, are they strong? Do they have skill? Are they diligent? If they can manage their flocks, I would like them to also care for mine. I'm going to trust. Listen to that. Trust. Pharaoh will trust them. He doesn't know them yet, but he will trust them. Verse 7. Joseph brought Yaakov his father and had him stand in Pharaoh's presence. Yaakov now stands in the very presence of Pharaoh. There is no intimidation, though. Yaakov is not intimidated by this ruler because, see, he knows whose he is. He knows he is God's. And Yaakov gave Pharaoh a blessing of greeting. See, God's message is being given to Pharaoh. Think about this. Maybe for you and me, we have to stop and think, who do we need to offer God's blessing to that maybe we don't even know yet? You know, verses 7 and 10 are interesting because Pharaoh is really pronouncing a salutation. He's really blessing them in some ways in God's name. See, this benediction was really put upon them by Pharaoh Senusert III. Senusert, or whatever his name is, for his generosity and his provision for Yaakov's family. He ascended to the throne, though, before the famine ended, and he honored his father's commitments. And so verses 7 and 10 talk about that blessing. We have a blessing of greeting. And in verse 10, it's a blessing of farewell. And I did not notice, I guess, the way I read it, I didn't even catch that until just now. So now I'm going to have to mark that one too, because there's a blessing of greeting and farewell as part of these as well. Okay, verse 8. Pharaoh said to Yaakov, How many are the days and years of your life? Which I think is interesting. In other words, how old are you? You're like a really old man. Like, you've got to be really, really old. And really, I think it's said out of admiration as much as anything. Pharaoh, though, may have never seen someone gray-haired and a beard. So there may have been some curiosity, too. And we have to remember, see, Pharaoh, he would have been 140-ish years old at this point. Pharaoh may not have seen anyone with gray hair. And of course, Egyptians shaved their heads and their faces. So I'm not sure he would have seen anyone that was gray. So it would have been an oddity. You might, this is kind of one of those that you almost want to put the smiley face kind of after, because it's one of those almost humorous pieces out of the conversation that had to happen. And we almost are insulted, aren't we? If someone asks us our age, I find it interesting. I really don't care. When people ask me how old I am, I tell them, and I tell them I'm 66, and they're like, no way. Either that, or they're like, oh yeah, you look that much. But anyway, we tend to not want to answer the question, and I don't know. Oh, well, actually, Yaakov does, because he was actually 130 years at this point. I was wrong. I was guessing off of another number. So he was 130. So Yaakov in verse 9 says, the days and years of my sojourn are 30 and 100 years. And so he's 130. And he answers it. Few and ill-fated have been the days and years of my life. They have not attained the days and years of my father's lives in the days of the sojourn. I mean, remember, he's talking about, he thinks his days are short. He's also kind of talking about, in some way, considering eternity in this. But we have to remember, Abraham was 175 years when he died. Isaac was 180 years. And so he's not as old as the others. So he's kind of saying, hey, I'm not that old yet. Hey, I still got time. Not as old as my father and my forefathers. Okay. So verse 10, Yaakov gave Pharaoh a blessing of farewell and went out from Pharaoh's presence. See, that farewell would have also been about happiness and thanks. So we had a blessing of greeting on the front end and happiness and thanks on the back end as he had this conversation with Pharaoh without intimidation. You have to wonder, was it more of a friendship that was almost, that could be an instantaneous? I don't know that it was, but you have to wonder, this was pretty interesting conversation. Verse 11. So Joseph settled his father and his brothers, giving them holdings in the land of Egypt. In the goodliest, I'm going to use that word, part of the land, in the region of Ramesses, as Pharaoh had commanded. And again, Goshen, Ramesses, zone. Ramesses really comes out of Exodus for that same land. And so we kind of get a little bit of that. I don't know. In our world, how many times do I don't know that we have towns change names, because unfortunately in our culture, they tend to die out. But if towns change names, that would be what this is. Or just different regions were known by different, and I've had that happen. Different regions are known by different things. And so, I can say, oh, here's a perfect example. I can say I live on just south of Highway 36 on, when I first got here, I always said on Highway 87. Well, then someone said, well, but where's the Vliets Road? Vliets Road. I have no idea what that is. I finally discovered Highway 87 and the Vliets Road are the same. Okay, so sometimes, we get those kind of identifications that do make a difference. I know in Kansas City, 95th Street, Highway 50, and are all the same. It's kind of the same thing, and you get that across the lines, regional. Okay. Verse 12. Joseph sustained his father, his brothers, and his father's entire household with bread in proportion to the little ones. Basically, Joseph made sure they had all the bread that they needed, that no one was going to be in need. There were rations going on, but even the little ones would have their portions. And Joseph was going to be the one to make sure that happened as it was supposed to. Joseph really is the rescuer. And in some ways, that is exactly what happens in these next, verses 13 to 24. We really see Joseph as the rescuer of the family, but also all of Egypt. Joseph rescues the whole country. What we see is that there is a transition as the famine continues from being able to buy where their money is gone, and then their animals, and then their land, and we get some taxing, and we're gonna see that happen as we go through these next, from, like I said, verses 13 to 24, really talk about how Joseph becomes that, and there are some pieces in this that in Egyptian records is not the same as what Moses wrote here. Maybe this was to help Joseph's stature become a little bit more, or to show how powerful and complete he is. Maybe the boys, just as the boys were to become my Lord's servants, so now the Egyptians become servants. We're going to see as we get into, but we're not going to start this section because I think this is a good place to end for tonight. I know. You know, I cannot, the time just amazes me how fast it goes, that we don't get very far, it seems like. And something more we've stopped because it's time. And my friends, I want you to know that on this All Saints Day, I do hold each of you. You each are saints. You are each remembered. You are each important. We know this night that as we close our study time together, that God is with us. He's walking before us, behind us, next to us. You hear me every week. God is not just saints of the past. God is with the saints of the future and with each of us this day. And now, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May he watch after you. May he care for you in this week ahead. For all who are struggling in illness, let there be healing. For all who struggle with any infirmity, let there be peace. And my friends, let you each have safety as you go about your week ahead. And a reminder, Wednesday, 7 o'clock, Revelation. I hope to see y'all there. Have a great evening, my friends. Come back. Amen. Go in peace. Bye.